Hello, everybody. And tonight, the exciting finish to The Pearl, the second half of Chapter 6. Okay, I guess everybody's following pretty well. There haven't been any questions yet. I'm glad those of you who are doing the work are doing it. And we'll finish this up, then we'll be starting something else pretty soon, which I hope you'll find exciting. The sun had passed over the stone mountains when Kino and Juana struggled up the steep, broken slope and came at last to the water. From this step they could look out over the sun-beaten desert to the blue gulf in the distance. They came utterly weary to the pool, and Juana slumped to her knees and first washed Coyotito's face and then filled her bottle and gave him a drink. And the baby was weary and petulant, and he cried softly until Juana gave him her breast, and then he gurgled and clucked against her. Kino drank long and thirstily at the pool for a moment. Then he stretched out beside the water and relaxed all his muscles and watched Juana feeding the baby. And then he got to his feet and went to the edge of the step where the water slipped over. And he searched the distance carefully. His eyes set on a point, and he became rigid. Far down the slope, he could see the two trackers. They were like little more than ants, or scurrying ants, and behind him, a larger ant. Juana had turned to look at him, and she saw his back stiffen. "How far?" she asked quietly. "They will be here by evening," said Kino. He looked up the long, steep chimney of the cleft where the water came down. "We must go west," he said. And his eyes searched the stone shoulder behind the cleft. And 30 feet on up the gray shoulder, he saw a series of little erosion caves. He slipped off his sandals and clambered up to them, gripping the bare stone with his toes. And he looked into the shallow caves. They were only a few feet deep, wind-hollowed scoops, but they sloped slightly downward and back. Kino crawled into the largest one and lay down and knew he could not be seen from the outside. Quickly he went back to Juana. "You must go up there. Perhaps they will not find us there," he said. Without question, she filled her water bottle to the top, and then Kino helped her up to the shallow cave and brought up the packages of food and passed them to her. And Juana sat in the cave entrance and watched him. She saw that he did not try to erase their tracks in the sand. Instead, he climbed up the brush cliff beside the water, clawing and tearing at the ferns and wild grapes as he went. And when he had climbed 100 feet to the next bench, he came down again. He looked carefully at the smooth rock shoulder toward the cave to see that there were no trace passage. And at last, he crept into the cave beside Juana. Okay, what he did there, guys, if you didn't catch it, okay, he went off about 100 feet to the side, and he pulled weeds out, pushed things with his feet in order to leave a false trail. Okay, that was important to his plan, to let them go up past him, and then he was going to do something else. "When they go on up," he said, "we will slip away, down to the lowlands again. I am afraid only that the baby may cry. You must see that he does not cry." "He will not cry," she said, and she raised the baby's face to her own, and looked into his eyes, and he stared solemnly back at her. "He knows," said Juana. Now, Kino lay down in the cave entrance, his chin braced on his crossed arms, and he watched the blue shadow of the mountains move out across the brushy desert until it reached the gulf, and the long twilight of the shadow was over the land. The trackers were long in coming, as though they had trouble with the trail Kino had left. It was dusk when they came at last to the little pool, and all three were on foot now, for a horse could not climb the last steep slope. From above they were thin figures in the evening. The two trackers scurried about on the little beach, and they saw Kino's progress up the cliff before they drank. The man with the rifle sat down and rested himself, and the trackers squatted near him. And in the evening the points of their cigarettes glowed and receded. And then Kino could see that they were eating, and the soft murmur of their voices came to him. Then darkness fell. Deep and black in the mountain cleft, the animals that used the pool came near and smelled men and drifted away again into the darkness. He heard a murmur behind him. Juana was whispering, "Coyotito." She was begging him to be quiet. Kino heard the baby whimper, and he knew from the muffled sounds that Juana had covered his head with her shawl. Down on the beach a match flared, and in its momentary light, Kino saw that two of the men were sleeping, curled up like dogs, while the third watched. He saw the glint of the rifle in the match light, and then the match died. But it left a picture in Kino's eyes. He could see it, just how each man was, two sleeping curled up, and a third squatting in the sand, with a rifle between his knees. Kino moved silently back into the cave. Juana's eyes were two sparks, reflecting a low star. Kino crawled quietly close to her, and he put his lips near to her cheek. "There is a way," he said, "but they will kill you." "If I get first to the one with the rifle," Kino said, "I must get to him first. Then I will be all right. Two are sleeping." Her hand crept out from under her shawl and gripped his arm. "They will see your white clothes in the starlight." "No," he said, "and I must go before moonrise." He searched for a soft word and then gave it up. "If they kill me," he said, "lie quietly, and when they are gone away, go to Laredo." Her hand shook a little, holding his wrist. "There is no choice," he said. "It is the only way. They will find us in the morning." Her voice trembled a little. "Go with God," she said. He peered closely at her, and he could see her large eyes. His hand fumbled out and found the baby. And for a moment his palm lay on Coyotito's head. And then Kino raised his hand and touched Juana's cheek, and she held her breath. Against the sky in the cave entrance, Juana could see that Kino was taking off his white clothes. For dirty and ragged though they were, they would show up against the dark night. His own brown skin was a better protection for him. And then she saw how he hooked his amulet neck string about the horn handle of his great knife, so that it hung down in front of him, and left both hands free. He did not come back to her. For a moment, his body was black in the cave entrance, crouched and silent, and then he was gone. Juana moved to the entrance and looked out. She peered like an owl from the hole in the mountain, and the baby slept under the blanket on her back, his face turned sideways against her neck and shoulder. She could feel his warm breath against her skin, and Juana whispered her combination of prayer and magic, her Hail Marys and her ancient intercession against the black, unhuman things. The night seemed a little less dark when she looked out, and to the east there was a lightning in the sky. Down near the horizon where the moon would show, and looking down she could see the cigarettes of the man on the watch. Kino edged like a slow lizard down the smooth rock shoulder. He had turned his neck string so that the great knife hung down from his back and could not clash against the stone. His spread fingers gripped the mountain, and his bare toes found support through contact, and even his chest lay against the stone so that he would not slip. For any sound, a rolling pebble or a sigh, a little slip of flesh on a rock, would rouse the watchers below. Any sound that was not germane to the night would make them alert. But the night was not silent. The little tree frogs that lived near the streams twittered like birds, and the high metallic ringing of the cicadas filled the mountain cleft, and Kino's own music was in his head, the music of his enemy, low and pulsing, nearly asleep. But the song of the family had become as fierce and sharp and feline as the snarl of a female puma. The family song was alive now and driving him down on the dark enemy. The harsh cicadas seemed to take up its melody, and the twittering tree frogs called little phrases of it. And Kino crept silently on his shadow. Kino crept silently as a shadow down the smooth mountain face. One bare foot moved a few inches, and its toes touched the stone and gripped. and the other foot a few inches, and then the palm of one hand a little downward, and then the other hand until the body moved. Kino's mouth was open so that even his breath would make no sound, for he knew that he was not invisible. If the watcher, sensing movement, looked at the dark place against the stone, which was his body, he could see him. Kino must move so slowly that he would not draw the watcher's eye. It took him a long time to reach the bottom and to crouch behind a little dwarf palm. His heart thundered in his chest, and his hands and his face were wet with sweat. He crouched and took great slow breaths to calm himself. Only 20 feet separated him from the enemy, and he tried to remember the ground between them. Was there any stone which might trip him in his rush? He kneaded his legs against cramp and found that his muscles were jerking after their long tension. And then he looked apprehensively to the east. The moon would rise in a few moments now, and he must attack before it rose. He could see the outline of the watcher, but the sleeping men were below his vision. It was the watcher that Kino must find quickly and without hesitation. Silently, he drew the amulet string over his shoulder and loosened the loop from the horn handle and of his great knife. He was too late, for as he rose from his crouch, the silver edge of the moon slipped above the eastern horizon, and Kino sank back behind his bush. It was an old and ragged moon, but it threw hard light and hard shadow into the mountain cleft, and now Kino could see the seated figure of the watcher on the little beach beside the pool. The watcher gazed full at the moon, and then he lighted another cigarette, and the match illuminated his dark face for a moment. There could be no waiting now. When the watcher turned his head, Kino must leap. His legs were as tight as wound springs. And then from above came a little murmuring cry. The watcher turned his head to listen, and then he stood up. And one of the sleepers stirred and awakened and asked quietly, "What is it?" "I don't know," said the watcher. "It sounded like a cry, almost like a human, like a baby." The man who had been sleeping said, "You can't tell. Some coyote bitch with a litter. I've heard a coyote pup cry like a baby." The sweat rolled down Kino's forehead and fell into his eyes and burned them. The little cry came again, and the watcher looked up the side of the hill to the dark cave. "Coyote, maybe," he said, and Kino heard the harsh click as he cocked the rifle. "If it's a coyote, this will stop it," the watcher said and raised his gun. Kino was in mid-leap when the gun crashed, and the barrel flash made a picture on his eyes. The great knife swung and crunched hollowly. It bit through neck and deep into the chest, and Kino was a terrible machine now. He grasped the rifle, even as he wrenched free his knife. His strength and his movement and his speed were a machine. He whirled and struck the head of the seated man like a melon. The third man scabbled away like a crab, slipped into the pool, and then he began to climb frantically, to climb up the cliff where the water penciled down. His hands and feet thrashed in a tangle of wild grapevine, and he whimpered and gibbered as he tried to get up. But Kino had become as cold and deadly as steel. Deliberately he threw the lever of the rifle, and then he raised the gun and aimed deliberately and fired. He saw his enemy tumble backward into the pool, and Kino strode to the water. In the moonlight he could see the frantic, frightened eyes, and Kino aimed and fired between the eyes. And then Kino stood uncertainly. Something was wrong. Some signal was trying to get through to his brain. Tree frogs and cicadas were silent now, and then Kino's brain cleared from its red concentration, and he knew the sound. The keening, moaning, rising, hysterical cry from the little cave in the side of the stone mountain, the cry of death. Okay, so at this point, Kino has killed all three of his enemy. He killed first the guy with the rifle. They said he plunged the knife through his neck deep into his chest, and then he hit the other guy in the side of the head with the butt of the rifle, and then he shot the third guy twice. Okay, so that was safe, but When the gun went off as Kino was leaping, that has had a very drastic negative effect on the family. Okay, Kino knows it. He calls it the cry of death. Okay. Everyone in La Paz remembers the return of the family. There may be some old ones who saw it, but those whose fathers and whose grandfathers told it to them remember it nevertheless. It is an event that happened to everyone. It was late in the golden afternoon when the first little boys ran hysterically into town and spread the word that Kino and Juana were coming back, and everyone hurried to see them. The sun was settling toward the western mountains, and the shadows on the ground were long, and perhaps that what left the deep impression on those who saw them. The two came from the rutted country road into the city, and they were not walking in single file. The two came from the rutted country road into the city, and they were not walking in single file. Kino ahead and Juana behind, as usual, but side by side. The sun was behind them, and the long shadows stalked ahead, and they seemed to carry two towers of darkness with them. Kino had a rifle across his arm, and Juana carried a shawl like a sack over her shoulder, and in it was a small, limp, heavy bundle. The shawl was crusted with dried blood, and the bundle swayed a little as she walked. Her face was hard and lined and leathery with fatigue, and with the tightness with which she fought fatigue. And her wide eyes stared inwardly on herself. She was as remote and as removed as heaven. Kino's lips were thin and his jaws tight, and the people say that he carried fear with him, and he was as dangerous as a rising storm. The people say that the two seemed to be removed from human experience, that they had gone through pain and had come out on the other side, that theirs was almost a magical protection about them. And those people who had rushed to see them crowded back and let them pass and did not speak to them. Kino and Juana walked through the city as though it were not there. Their eyes glanced neither right nor left, nor up nor down, but stared only straight ahead. Their legs moved a little jerkily, like well-made wooden dolls, and they carried pillars of black fear about them. And as they walked through the stone and plaster city, brokers peered at them from barred windows, and servants put one eye to a slitted gate, and mothers turned the faces of the youngest children inward against their skirts. Kino and Juana strode side by side through the stone and plaster city and down among the brush houses, and the neighbors stood back and let them pass. Juan Thomas raised his hand in greeting and did not say the greeting, and left his hand in the air for a moment uncertainly. In Kino's ears, the song of the family was as fierce as a cry. He was immune and terrible, and the song had become a battle cry. They trudged past the burned square, where their house had been without even looking at it. They cleared the brush that edged the beach and picked up their way down the shore toward the water, and they did not look toward Kino's broken canoe. And when they came to the water's edge, they stopped and stared out over the gulf. And then Kino laid the rifle down, and he dug among his clothes. And then he held the great pearl in his hand. He looked into its surface, and it was gray and ulcerous. Evil faces peered from it into his eyes, and he saw the light of burning. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw the frantic eyes of the man in the pool. And in the surface of the pearl, he saw Cayo Tito laying in the little cave with the top of his head shot away. And the pearl was ugly. It was gray, like a malignant growth. And Kino heard the music of the pearl, distorted and insane. Kino's hand shook a little, and he turned slowly to Juana, and he held the pearl out to her. She stood beside him, still holding her dead bundle over her shoulder. She looked at the pearl in his hand for a moment, and then she looked into Kino's eyes and said softly, "No, you." And then Kino drew back his arm and flung the pearl with all his might. Kino and Juana watched it go, winking and glimmering under the settling sun. They saw the little splash in the distance, and they stood side by side, watching the place for a long time. And the pearl settled into the lovely green water and dropped toward the bottom. The waving branches of the algae called to it and beckoned to it. The lights on its surface were green and lovely. It settled down to the sand bottom among the fern-like plants. Above the surface of the water was a green mirror, and the pearl lay on the floor of the sea. A crab scampering over the bottom raised a little cloud of sand, and when it settled, the pearl was gone. The music of the pearl drifted to a whisper and disappeared. Okay, that's the end. Okay? Interesting book. It's a short read. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, it's one of John Steinbeck's book about men and women who are struggling to make it from one day to the next. Okay, there's quite a few vocabulary words, especially in the last full chapter 6, which probably be an assignment maybe for tomorrow. Okay? A few questions that I'm going to send you tonight, or tomorrow morning actually, because even though it's night, you'll be getting this assignment for the morning. That will end us up with the book as far as the questions go. We're going to do a little vocabulary work. We've already done the major test, and we'll take these questions tonight as the test for Chapter 6. And then we'll be moving on to a new book soon. It's called Touching Spirit Bear. I've used this book several times before for 11th graders. It should be very appropriate for your grade level because it deals with mid-teens and there's some anger problems and rehabbing, repairing a life, and stuff like that. It's a very good book. What you like about this book, the book is not only online, there's also the audio version online. So instead of listening to my voice, you're going to get to listen to somebody else's voice. If you want, you could read or listen or hopefully do both. The choice will be yours. But again, there'll be some questions. There are 26 chapters, I believe. So we're not going to... 28 chapters, excuse me. So in a few times when there are short chapters, we may do 2 chapters a night. But anyway, don't want to get too far ahead of myself. That's for a couple days down the road. I think you should enjoy it. Okay? Open mind, open book, and you'll enjoy it. Anyway, thanks for listening to me with the Pearl. I hope I didn't destroy your ears too much. And my wife is looking at me like maybe I destroyed her ears. Just so you know, she tried to make me laugh several times while I'm doing this, and she's maybe succeeded. I don't know. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the book. Do the questions. There'll only be maybe 10 short questions at the most. Get them back to me as soon as you can. Do the vocabulary tomorrow. There'll be no more video for me, as far as this goes. Just be an assignment. See, today's Wednesday, Thursday for Friday. There'll be an assignment tonight or tomorrow. Thursday's work for vocabulary. These questions. Friday will be the vocabulary. I have to get my day straight, being I'm making this on a different day. Anyway, guys, if you have any questions, please send them to me. If you have any of your friends in the class that you speak to, ask them if they're doing this work, because I still have yet to receive any work at all from about 4 or 5 guys in the class and girls. Okay, and I'd hate for somebody to fail who did well all year just because they don't do any work. Those of you who are turning in work are doing really well. I'm impressed. Okay, I think the classroom deal is coming along pretty good. I think everybody knows now to just type right back on the document that I send you. Type right on there. Put your cursor right underneath the question or at the end of the question and start typing. Okay, I will get it that way when you submit it back to me to edit, which is when I edit is when I actually, grade it and send you the grade. Again, if you have any questions, you can post them through Classroom or send them to me through an email. Again, it's rbohn@srsd.net. Hope you all have a good night. Take care.